if you want it closer to you, pull it up and over.
All right, good morning, members of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee and staff and public that is here and joined in online. Welcome to the September meeting of the Asheville Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. I'm Andy Barnett, I'm the co-chair, and we are a committee whose primary function is to advise city leadership about affordable housing policy and priorities for city funding. We work with the Housing Community Development Committee of the City Council to forward our recommendations to the full City Council. All committee members and staff are now participating in person. We're streaming live on our Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the committee page. You can also watch the meeting on the city's YouTube channel, either live or recorded. The public can listen to the meeting live by calling 855-925-2801, then enter code 7663. Public comment will be taken at the end of the meeting, and we will also accept comments by email or voicemail, but they must be made by 5 p.m. the day before the meeting. All right, I will now take roll. Scott Adams.
Present.
Emily Axtman. David Bartholomew.
Here.
Barry Bialik.
Here.
Chris Day.
I'm here.
Paul Heathman. Tara Irby.
Here.
Brian Methvin. Dewana Little. Babs Phillip. Wayna Smith. Here. And our City Council liaison, Antoinette Mosley. All right. So we do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We do have a quorum. Sorry, just had to count and make sure because we're close. So we will proceed with our first agenda item, which is approving the minutes from our virtual meeting in August. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Whew. It's always good when we get at least that far. The second thing before we get into our presentation today is to give you a little bit of an update on the status of where things are with the committee. So we have a lot of vacant seats in the room today, and we have a little bit of turnover happening in the committee. So let me get you up to date on a few things that are going on. So today is the last meeting for Barry Bialik and Dewana Little. So I'm going to let's give Barry, since he's here, and Dewana out there in the world, a round of applause for their long service, 6 years of service. Or at least that. So both Barry and Dewana have filled out. Hey, there she is. we can give you a round of applause too. So for folks listening, Dewana just walked in the room. That's why we're clapping twice. So thanks to both of you for your service with AHAC. It's been invaluable, and both of you are terming out, and so those positions become open next for our next meeting. And then we also have a couple of folks who have agreed to step up and serve a second term with us. So both Scott Adams and Brian Methvin have agreed to serve a second term. And then we have two folks who are moving on. Emily Axman and Marjorie Bukowski are both relocating, and so their seats are open as well. So we have 4 open seats moving into the next month. We had a strong response to our request for applications for the committee, knowing that we had 2 vacant seats. So we do feel like we've got enough folks in the applicant pool to fill all 4 vacant seats. We got 9 applications. We'll be reviewing those to make sure that we're keeping the committee representative of the demographic and geographic diversity of the community that we serve, as well as making sure that we have the right perspectives and expertise on the committee for us to get our work done. So we'll be looking at that and making recommendations to council by the end of this month for approval by council on October 10th for new members to join the committee. So anybody have questions about all of this moving around? And then we'll talk about officers in just a second.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
technical? So because I was wondering about that, like if actually we're here next meeting, because I think the appointment is after that.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt them.
Oh.
But you are welcome to attend next month. You really aren't off until somebody's appointed to replace you. So
Yeah.
they say September, but then they really kind of drag it out. So the appointments will be after your next meeting, like October 10th, 12th, somewhere in there. And so those new folks will be at the November meeting. And just also for Scott and Brian, they have agreed to serve a second term, but council still needs to make that reappointment. It's not guaranteed. But they
All right.
both have good attendance, so they,
But I'm happy for another round of applause next meeting.
Okay, we'll do it again. We'll do it again in October. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. All right, which brings any other questions about,
Yeah, so
or
is
things that
the,
I need to learn, obviously, about the application
does this
process?
board have any input on the applications, or is it all at council level, or is it both? How does,
I think what we have typically done is looked at that at the officer level, but if you would like to see the list of applicants, we can, or
it was
see
a
the-
curiosity.
Yeah,
see
it's
the
fine.
short list of folks that we are planning to put forward to council, we can share that.
yeah, there were 8 applicants, I believe, 8 or 9.
I counted 9
9,
this morning.
okay.
Yeah, a strong pool of applicants.
And generally, it goes to boards and commissions committee first. They discuss, they review chair and vice chair recommendations. Sometimes they accept them, sometimes they don't. Then it goes to council after that, and then council makes a decision.
Okay, so then on to officers. Obviously, one of the folks who's leaving the committee is our co-chair, Marjorie Bukowski. So we will need to decide as a committee whether we want to continue to move forward with co-chairs and a vice chair. So if you are interested in serving in the co-chair role, why don't you want them to reach out to me or you, Sasha, does it matter? Why don't you reach out to me and let me know if you're interested in serving in the co-chair role, and if so, we'll bring those names forward for consideration at next month's meeting. And if we don't hear from anybody at next month's meeting, we'll bring forward the idea of moving forward with a single chair. So that.
No one's hearing you at home right now.
No one's hearing me. Okay,
Well,
because I'm not.
You just need to
Okay,
speak up a little.
sorry.
It's okay.
All right. So I'll repeat that for folks at home. We'll entertain applications for co-chair for the next month and consider those names at our October meeting. And if none come forward, we'll entertain the decision to move to a single chair and vice chair. Good? Makes sense to everybody? Okay. That was a whole lot of moving pieces and housekeeping and things that I didn't know. So now we can move on to things that I do know, which is we have a great presentation today from Anna Skaya from the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust. Land Trust has been around for a few years now and is really hitting their stride with the impact that they're having in the community. So excited to hear about this unique homeownership solution in our community. So Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Do I also have to lean in and do this? Thank you for having me. I know a lot of you do know about ABCLT and what community land trusts are, but some of you are new. So I'm going to give a brief overview, and I always start this presentation out with a video, but I might skip that because, yes, I have to skip it because this is not a PowerPoint. All right, so a little bit of an overview of community land trusts. So we were the first community land trust in Western North Carolina. There is now one in Boone. But we are not new as far as the model is concerned. There are over 300 community land trusts across the country, and new ones are forming very frequently. The two that I always highlight in this presentation are the two that you see on your screen. The first community land trust ever was in rural Georgia, New Communities, Inc. in 1969. which was started because African American farmers were being pushed off of their land. And so they gathered resources together and they purchased their own property so that they wouldn't be at risk of displacement in the future. The other community land trust on the screen is the first urban CLT, and that was 1981 in Cincinnati, formed out of a need to fight gentrification and displacement. So similarly to the rural CLT, but more closely related to what you see here in Asheville. So when we talk about what does the model look like, the first component is ownership, and this is probably the most important one for people to understand. What the model does is breaks out ownership of the land versus ownership of the structure on that land. So the CLT retains ownership of the land, and the buyer owns the structure itself. We then lease the land to the buyer. It is a 99-year ground lease. That ground lease is renewable at the end of every 99 years. It's also inheritable and it's mortgageable, meaning that our buyers get mortgages just like any other home buyer, except they don't own the land, they only own the property on that land. The ground lease is what ensures permanent affordability. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but there are resale restrictions in the ground lease to make sure that when the home is sold in the future, it is affordable to future buyers. The second component is organization. So we're a nonprofit. Like every other nonprofit, we have a board of directors, but ours is structured a little bit differently because we have 3 different sections in the board. So the first 2 sections you see on your screen are really community representatives. So a third of our board is meant to be made up of leaseholders. So these are people who lease land from us, whether they're owners or renters. Another third are community residents. These are people that live in the communities that we serve. And finally, the last third is public representatives. So these are individuals who may or may not live in the community, and they have a special expertise that they bring to the board. This could be legal, this could be financial, things like that, to make sure that we have a well-rounded board as far as skill sets are represented. And finally, operation. This model has always been explicit about who it should serve, and that is people who have been historically excluded from the political and economic mainstream, and primarily focusing on people who have not been able to purchase a home, especially here in Asheville in the past. So now a little bit about benefits of a community land trust. The first one and the biggest one I would say is affordability. You all know how prices are skyrocketing, what the market is doing, so I don't need to go over that, but you see some numbers on your screen which show how much our buyers typically pay, and that is between $125,000 and $225,000. So that's a huge difference between what we are selling homes for and what is out there on the open market. The actual price does depend on the buyer's income, so again, all of our buyers qualify through one of our lenders to get a mortgage, and whatever they qualify for is their purchase price of the home. Our buyers can also use down payment assistance. We can layer down payment assistance as well. There are a couple of options that we have used in the past, but there are limited options that work fairly well with the land trust model. The next benefit is community. So again, we're a community land trust. We wouldn't be a community land trust without the people who are our members and our supporters. Our homeowners are automatically members of the CLT, and all of our members can participate through voting. Anyone can be a member, and those individuals who live in Buncombe County can choose to be voting members. And those voting members are the ones that get to vote to elect our board of directors, vote on things like if we have any bylaw changes, if we, for any reason, decide to sell land in the future, that has to go to a membership vote. And finally, permanent affordability, which again we'll talk about here in a minute, but that is really what is the most important aspect to preventing future displacement and gentrification in the community. So lastly, the benefit is economic stability. So again, our buyers have consistent mortgage payments because they do get a loan from one of our lenders. They do have fixed rate 30-year mortgages. They also have a reduced tax burden, so our buyers are only paying taxes on the purchase price of the home. Very important to make that distinction. So they're not paying property taxes on the value of the home. They're only paying property taxes on the purchase price of the home. Also important for those of you who know appraisers and real estate agents out there, our sales are to be excluded from comps. So that's something that we have to do as an education in the community to make sure that people know that our sales are to be excluded from comps on the real estate market. And finally, our buyers do build wealth. And so you see 2.25% compounded annually on the screen. That is what's in our ground lease, and that is how much equity our buyers accumulate. So when they purchase a home, we lock in that purchase price, and then every year that they're in that home, 2.25% compounds annually on that purchase price. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but the example I always use is $150,000. If somebody purchases a home from us for $150,000, and they stay in that home for about 10 years, at the end of those 10 years, they've accumulated almost $40,000 in equity. So we take that $150,000, we add it to the 40, and that's the new sales price. So that $190,000 is the new purchase price for the next buyer. So a little bit more about us. This is our mission, and it's really broken out into 3 sections. So the first section is the what. What are we doing? We are working to establish residential, commercial, and community spaces. Right now, we are primarily focused on single-family home ownership opportunities, but we are eager to get into the rental market and the commercial space as well. The second portion of the mission is the who, and that's the italicized portion, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and low to moderate income residents. That is a population that we are aiming to serve. And finally, the last portion is the end result, kind of what are we gearing towards, and that's social, economic, and cultural capital, building that in the community, specifically in our historically Black communities in the city of Asheville. We as an organization were incorporated in 2018, really formed to address the injustices of urban renewal in the city of Asheville. This has been a really community-led process. I came on board as the first staff member in early 2020, but there was probably a decade of organizing before my time. So conversations started as early as 2010, and then officially started organizing around 2014, again incorporated in 2018, and received our 501c3 status in 2019. So at this point, we've been fully operational for a little under 4 years. Since I came on in 2020. And I do want to point out that our service area is all of Buncombe County, but again, right now we're primarily focused on the city of Asheville because we only have funding for capital expenses in the city of Asheville. A little bit about our program. So of course, home ownership is the biggest one, and I've talked about that majority of the presentation, but I also want to point out that we did pilot a property tax relief program. We received funding from Dogwood Health Trust to do that, and this was intended to be funding for those households that were not eligible for other property tax relief funding. So, of course, we know that there's the Buncombe County and City of Asheville property tax relief, but not all households in the City of Asheville are eligible for that program. And so we wanted to make sure that specifically in the historically Black neighborhoods that we're focusing on, there were other opportunities for property tax relief to prevent foreclosure. We have also created a home repair program. We've done this in 2 of our focus neighborhoods because of the next bullet point there is the neighborhood-based funds. So in Montford and Stumptown and Burton Street, we created those neighborhood-based funds, really raising money from the community itself to funnel right back into the community. So in those 2 neighborhoods, we can set aside those funds for home repairs specifically in that community. And finally, for 2 years now, we've had a community ambassador program. So these are individuals that we've recruited to go through a 6-month training program with us, and then 6 months after that training, they're in the community, they're recruiting applicants for us, volunteers for us, members, donors, things like that. Some of our key accomplishments. So at this time, we have 3 full-time employees, which I am thrilled about. We have almost 300 active members. We have purchased 6 properties. So 2 of those are vacant land, 4 of those are homes. And then contracts pending on 2 additional vacant land properties. We have also raised over $85,000 for our 2 neighborhood funds, the ones that I just mentioned on the last slide, and that's where we implemented our home repair program. And finally, we've sold 2 homes now, so really excited about that. We just sold our 2nd one a couple of months ago, and we have a 3rd one under contract. And challenges. So the first one I'm not going to talk about too much. You all talk about this, I think, at every meeting you have, but the rising costs of acquisition and construction. The second one is lack of operational funding. We've been really fortunate to receive $1 million from the city of Asheville through the bond referendum, and we did get $100,000 for operational funding as well. But since then, we've had challenges getting operational funding. Funders do not love to just give money for staffing, but we can't run our programs without that money, right? So we are really working on getting more of the operational funds to make sure that we have the capacity to run our programs, acquire properties, and all of those things. Another challenge is pool of applicants who are ready. We have about a little over 40 applicants now, and a small percentage of them is getting to pre-qualification. So with our new hire recently, we are figuring out where are people getting stuck in the process and how can we get them past that to get them to pre-qualification. So working on that, but again, about 40 applicants in our pipeline. And the other issue is that not everyone who's getting to pre-qualification is even able to pre-qualify for that $125 to $225 price that I talked about a few slides ago. So we're working on that as well. So how do we get people to pre-qualification through the entire process? And then also how do we get people to pre-qualify for at least $125,000? We've had quite a few who are pre-qualifying around $100,000. So there is still that gap. For every home that we sell, we invest up to $150,000 per home to bring the purchase price down to the buyers. So of course we can invest more, but that means more fundraising, right? So looking at all the options that we have to get more applicants pre-qualified in our price range. And then also many applicants are self-employed. So as hard as it is to get a mortgage now, it's even harder if you are self-employed. And so we're trying to figure out what we can do to support our self-employed applicants even more to get them to pre-qualification in our price range. And I think this is my last slide. So a few ways that you can get involved is becoming a member. Help us obtain pro bono or reduced fee services. I really want to highlight this one because you all are so ingrained in our real estate community. We need appraisers, surveyors, inspectors, and attorneys. We can't have enough of those, especially for our buyers. We want to make sure that the attorneys that represent them are able to provide reduced fee or pro bono services so they don't have an additional cost for that, as well as inspectors, surveyors, all of that. Also encourage sellers to consider ABCLT. So on the screen are our focus communities, focus neighborhoods, and if you know anybody or hear anybody that's considering selling their home in those communities, Burton Street, East End, Shiloh, Southside, and Stumptown, encourage them to reach out to us. We can't spend $500,000 on a property, so not every property will work for us, but there are situations where people might be able to sell to us at a price point that works for us. And finally, advocate for permanent affordability. We are, again, new to the area. This model is fairly complex, and so we need all of you out there talking to the community about who we are and what we do and how this can be a powerful tool to prevent future displacement. And I think that's it. Thank you all. I've got some time for questions.
Thank you, Anna. Any questions for Anna?
Yeah, I've got a couple, if you don't mind. Can you walk us through, like, I mean, of the 2 that you've been able to get into homes, can you walk through kind of like the financing layers and what the properties were like, just so we know like what's worked? So if we need to help focus on, like, how to keep focused on what does work more, if you can.
So financing as far as us purchasing or selling
No,
those
for the seller,
properties?
like for the buyer, for the two people that
Gotcha,
have become
yeah.
homeowners, like what did that look like?
Yes, so all of our buyers have to go through one of our lenders. It has to be a lender that works with community land trusts. They just have to know how to do that, and they have to have experience doing it. So we can't just go to any lender. So what happens is once somebody is ready for pre-qualification within our program, we send them to the lenders. We now have 2 lenders. With our first home, we only had 1, so that buyer had to go through that particular lender. But now we have 2. So we send people to both, and whatever works out the best as far as their experience and their pre-qualification is the lender that they end up going with. And then the other thing is down payment assistance. So for those first 2 buyers, we were able to work with the YMI using their down payment assistance program, which was extremely helpful because it was a grant. We, going forward, hope that that program comes back and we are able to use those grant funds for our buyers. But at this time, for our third buyer and anyone that's getting pre-qualified right now is most likely looking at a loan for down payment assistance, and this is through the lender typically. And I believe that money does come from NCHFA. But anytime we can get grant funding for down payment assistance, that is of course best. I will say right now, interest rates are killing us. I think they're at like 7.25% right now for our buyers, so that is a huge challenge. Even somebody that was able to get pre-qualified last year at a lower interest rate is now having a really hard time pre-qualifying for that. But that's typically how the process works. So they're getting the lending from the bank. We do the best that we can to prepare the buyer, knowing kind of what the bank expects. So all of the bank requirements and regulations are what we share with the buyers, but those aren't necessarily our requirements and regulations. So we just have to go by what they are requiring.
When we talked, offline a couple weeks ago, but because one thing that you said to me, like, it was like kind of like, oh my God, the credit counseling, because you say like the process that it goes through, which is just explain, because I think you said they're not live, they're only virtual now. Is that right?
Oh, I see. Yes, so before pre-qualification.
Yeah.
So they do have to complete homebuyer education with us, and we refer them to OnTrack for that. So those classes right now are virtual with OnTrack, yeah, and they're self-paced, and so our buyers are doing that kind of on their own time. And
That's hard.
yeah, we're seeing that a lot of people are getting stuck at that homebuyer education phase.
Have they given any indication when they'll, because they've always been the biggest provider in our market of classes like that.
Yeah.
And have they given any indication when they might be live again with those? Because that's such a one-on-one personal need that I think that handholding really
Yeah.
helps.
I'm not sure the answer to that right now. I've had a coworker reach out to them and see if we can work on getting something in person or just get more information about when they might be going back in person. I think one of the things that OnTrack has said is that there may be a better virtual course to fit our buyers, so that's something that we're going to try as well. It's just also, we have to make sure that the homebuyer education that our buyers go through is going to meet the lender requirement as well.
That's a lot. Okay, one last question. Your 2 lots under contract, is that the city lots or is that something different?
Yes,
And
that's the city lots.
And I know I've been asking for years, where are we at with that, like with the city and with you?
Yeah, I just met with city staff probably 2-3 weeks ago, so there will be a follow-up meeting to talk about that. We just have to determine, we have some old city funding through Home and CDBG, so we have to determine if that is going to be a good fit for us, and if so, if we're using that with those city-owned lots. If they come as a package, they kind of have to be done as a package deal, but if we're not using those together, then we can go ahead and move with the purchase of the city-owned lots.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Quick question. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that you all have 2 vacant lots currently. Are you all looking at becoming a developer or partnering otherwise with other entities, or just curious about that?
Yes, so partnership would be best. We just did our first home renovation this year, and it wasn't an easy process, I'll say that. And we have another home right now that needs renovation, so that will be next. So early 2024, we'll be renovating that home. And then after that is done and sold, we'll be looking to build on those 2 vacant lots.
Thanks.
I got a question. Have y'all tried partnering, or I think they have like a partner certification process with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta? Because I know they do down payment assistance through a partnership, I think around $7,500.
Yes, I have talked to everybody out there that potentially does down payment assistance, and I'm trying to dig and remember exactly what they said to me. I think that program has to go through a specific lender, which is not a lender that works with community land trusts. Not 100% sure on that, but I think it's one of those where it's like, yes, we have the funding and you could use it, but there's this roadblock to us being able to use it.
Have y'all worked with self-help or had the conversation with self-help credit union? Because I know they're one of the lenders about potential, because I know they supported community land trust in Durham. So I'm not sure if that.
Yes, so self-help has given lots of loans to community land trusts across the country. They've never provided mortgages to buyers. So it is something that we hope they will be able to do. We do know that they're interested in doing that, and I'll have to check in with one of our board members who works there to see where we are in the process on that. So hopefully this or next year they'll be able to come on board as another lender.
Quick question. Is there any sense with the homebuyer education that's being provided virtually, like where the buyers are getting stuck, or what the real barrier there is from the feedback you've gotten from On Track?
We haven't gotten any feedback. We've just kind of done an assessment of all of our applicants and how many of them are in each of the stages in the process. And we just saw that most of them are at that haven't completed homebuyer education stage. So my assumption is that the challenge is that one, it's virtual. Two, it's self-paced, meaning that, you don't have a date and time where you have to show up and sit in the class and absorb the information. You have to create time to do it. And the third is that it's a lot of information. Even in person, it's a lot of information. I've sat through those courses probably 20 different times in, different settings, different organizations, and every time I learn something new. So for somebody who's never been in a class like that to sit down and do it all virtually, it's just a lot. And so we'll be talking to our applicants and getting a better feel for, did people start and then it was too much and they kind of just quit and gave up, or did they not start at all, or what is the challenge? I don't have a great answer to that, but those are some of my assumptions as far as what's happening.
Any other questions for Anna? Thank you so much, and I know you came in to do this presentation on your vacation, so extra thank you for that.
Don't tell anybody.
A round of applause for that.
Yeah, sorry, I just told the world and put it in the official record, but thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Okay, well, that brings us around to where we are on our committee work plan for the year. Just as a reminder, we have 3 big pieces on our work plan: creating our recommendations for possible revisions to Housing Trust Fund and the Luigi policy, advising and providing sort of the affordable housing perspective into the group that's working on the Missing Middle project, and then assisting with the development of a new affordable housing plan. So those are the 3 things that we're working on this year, just to kind of catch us up on where we are on those things. In terms of our work around Housing Trust Fund and Luigi, a couple of months, a month ago, we heard the report back from the Connect work group with community input around that, the Luigi policy. I know Build has received feedback from several developers around some questions that they put out to folks about the Luigi policy. So I think I'm kind of excited to say we're ready to go do the hard work now of actually crafting what those recommendations are based on all of the information that we've been gathering over the last several months. And I'm going to suggest, based on where we are with these work plan items and our task forces, that it might be time to think about letting our build and connect structure remain dormant for a little bit and put together some work groups to really focus on closing out these different work plan tasks through the end of the year. So I'd like us to think about putting together a small work group to be kind of the point to draft the set of recommendations that will come back to the full committee for discussion, and then once we have full committee approval on those recommendations, to go to HCD as our recommendations on how we might improve Luigi and Housing Trust Fund. So I'd like to suggest that we do that. We've got some folks who are working on, who are kind of our point people on that missing middle work, and we've got, we'll be hearing more from Sasha in just a minute about where we are with the affordable housing plan and how we might give input to that. So that's a conversation that I wanted us to have, sort of the idea that we might kind of press pause on our build and connect structure and put together our work groups a little bit more around what our work plan for the year is, particularly identifying some folks who are willing to work on crafting that set of recommendations for Housing Trust Fund and Luigi. And I've offered to be a part of that. So has Brian from leadership, but we would love to have a couple other folks. So, and I think Brian may have called and twisted some of your arms about that. But anyway, I'd like just a brief discussion with the committee on the idea of kind of reconfiguring some of our work groups, and then if you've got interest in serving on that recommendations committee. The idea would be to have those recommendations drafted for our October meeting. If we need to, we can roll a little bit into November and still meet our deadline of having that to HCD by the end of the year, but the sooner the better, I think, at this point. We have gathered what information we need to make those recommendations. So thoughts about that structure and interest in serving on that new policy draft working group?
So just to clarify, are you talking about, either sunsetting the build and connect groups and forming a new group that's focused on, the policy recommendations coming out of the two? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm game.
You're game to serve on it, or you're game to?
Yeah, game to serve.
Okay.
Do you envision separate ones for each of the policies, or is this one group we're doing here?
I think we could do them both together. They're very similar, and I think our recommendations are going to be very similar.
I'm not good at wordsmithing, but I've got, especially the land use incentive grant, I've got experience with and would like to be on that,
Okay.
give input on the subcommittee for that small
Okay.
group.
Great. Anybody not a fan of the idea of, press and pause on our current build connect structure and kind of getting a little more focused on our work plan deliverables? We can always go back to that model. It seemed to work well in a lot of ways, but I'd like to drive us to getting these things that we said we were going to accomplish this year accomplished. Anybody not a fan of that idea?
I think it's a good idea to, yeah.
Okay.
Makes a lot of sense right
Okay.
now.
All right, then we'll go there. Right. If anyone else is interested in joining Scott and Chris, who put their names forward to serve on that work group, who would be interested in serving on the kind of policy draft work group, let me know. We can have, that's 4 if both Brian and I serve. We may have kind of duplication of perspective with the 4 that we have on there, so we may not need both Brian and I, but we can have, as long as we have less than 7, right? Is that right? As long as we have less than 7, we are good to, for that work group. So we can have a couple more people if people are interested in having input, or possibly even if you wanted to have a little bit of input once the ball got rolling, but before we got to the full committee meeting, that might be helpful as well, just to touch base and make sure that we're on track. Somebody else?
I have a question. And that is there a specific skill set or perspective or, that you're looking for this group to be able to get the work done effectively and efficiently?
It would be nice to have both the build and connect teams represented in some way, just because you both have been looking at this policy question from 2 different lenses. I think mostly it's, as in any case where we're making recommendations, just having creative and curious people and people who are willing to check all of our blind spots so that we don't put something in front of the full committee and then go, wait a second, we didn't think about X. So obviously the full committee serves that role, and we'll have plenty of time in our next meeting for robust conversation around that draft, and can make sure that we didn't do anything, didn't miss anything obvious. But if we can, the more that we can do all of that before we have to do it in this setting, that would be helpful.
Can I wingman you for a minute? I think this, my understanding of when we set it, the technical word, when you said something else, it's called it's a task force, because there's some different ways of how it has to be. I think this is how we had to do it, was a task force, and that means that it has to, it's also open to we actually haven't had other members, public members can be part of it too. It doesn't just have to be members of the committee. So it's, I think, and it's because I think it's anytime there's over 3 people meeting, it has to be called the task force, and then it's open to invite all members of the public invited. I think that's how we had to do the build and connect, because that's just something that then if someone like Kate or someone from Thrive wanted to be part of that, it's a way that they can do that. But I think that's how we had to do it when we set up the original build and connect. It was called the task force. Anytime there's over 3 members together, it has to be, and for it not to be a public noticed meeting, it has to be a task force meeting, and it has to be open to, the task force has to be open to having non-committee members on it. I think that's...
Sasha, is that how you
sounds
remember it?
generally right. I think open to it, yes. I don't think the entire public is invited. We're not doing public notice, so yeah.
But it's a good, but when you're, for other members who might want to be part of something like that, it's it's a discussion that people can contribute and be part of, that's not just committee members.
And Andy, if you wouldn't mind, just to refresh everyone's memory, the scope of these changes is somewhat limited. It's not, we're not opening the entire policies of everything. Do you
Yeah,
wanna
that's
talk
right.
about
So the specific things that we're looking at in this is the scoring criteria in both of these programs. So at this point, we're holding a lot of our any big structural changes to the programs until it gets reviewed by in the context of the affordable housing plan. So we're not going to be coming back with we should just get rid of this program and do something totally different. This is a few tweaks to respond to input that we've gathered from the community and things that seem to be barriers to effective use of these policies, and to get us to a point where we're the bigger solutions obviously need a level of community engagement and policy analysis that all volunteer-based committee really isn't in a position to provide, especially when we've got this, that is specifically a task in the affordable housing plan, and we've got, time allocated to do that study. Does that sound right? Okay.
So was it just the scoring criteria, or was there, did I miss that? Was there something else? A couple of other points?
Tara, I don't have the specific language in front of me. It's primarily the scoring criteria. I don't want to go too far down the road and say it was this or not that, but it is limited in scope.
Which is kind of a lot, actually.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can move forward on that in terms of where we are with the status of those recommendations. And then, so our third piece of the work plan was working on the affordable housing plan and helping to bring a new plan into existence. And so, Sasha, I know you have some updates on how that is happening.
Sure, and I didn't put together a full presentation, but I realized I have a few slides that you might find helpful. We went under contract with Enterprise on August 28th, and that was, I don't know how much experience you all have with bureaucracy. I know some of you do, but sometimes that is like just, it's hard just to get under contract. But once you're under contract, it's, it's a lot better. So, now it's going to make me.
Could you tilt your microphone a little bit more toward you?
Sure.
Thank you.
Let me. So maybe this won't be easy. So while I do this, we contracted, just to remind anybody who wasn't here last month or doesn't remember, we contracted with Enterprise Community Partners, and they are a national nonprofit. They've been around for 40 years. They are known in the community development field as real estate developers. They actually do deals, affordable housing deals, or deals that benefit the community in some way. But they also have a branch that's a consulting branch. And they have worked in a lot of communities across the country. They helped, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, they helped the city of Charlotte produce their affordable housing framework, which I really liked. And what really made the difference, we had 3, 4 top firms, national firms that we looked at. And the thing that made the biggest difference is that they bake equity into how they do their process. It's not something you got to say, okay, remember, this is Asheville, you got to think about this. It's just how they do their work. So that was a huge thing. Let's see if I can make this work. I may not be able to. Sorry. Okay. Well, mirror. Okay, beautiful. Okay, here we go. So here is just, they put together a slideshow for us for our kickoff. We had an internal kickoff this, just last week with our internal staff team. So I've got folks from DSD, finance, legal, planning, some other community development folks, equity, on our internal staff team that's going to help advise these folks. So this is our team. Christopher Kizzy is not as involved. He's, pretty high up in the organization, but Bithia, Jarrah, Erica, and Zachary are kind of our core team. We met with them again yesterday. Jarrah is kind of the lead project manager for this project, and he will be coming here either late September or first week of October. And they will be kind of doing a scoping trip and really getting the lay of the land. Even though we're feeding them information right now, that will be their first. I don't know about, I'm not a fan of Gantt charts, but if you are, this is the Gantt chart version. We have a second version. So really our goal is to be done have that draft plan probably by the end of May. And the goal is really to get to council May or June for adoption. Would love to have this in place before the end of the budget year. It will have recommendations in it for an affordable housing bond. I've been using the word potential, but it seems pretty clear that we're going to be going out for an affordable housing bond. That's been said publicly many times. So pretty sure we're doing that, so we want to have, staff wants clarity, and we think this community wants clarity on, like, if we do this bond, what are we going to be paying for? What is it going to be going to? So that is a huge benefit of this plan. So just as a reminder, and maybe this was up here, they are kind of updating our housing needs assessment. They are looking at our city tools, so our housing trust fund, the WEEG, city-owned land, fee rebates, kind of assessing those, making recommendations about how those should be changed, and they will take your feedback and what you all are recommending into that, fold that in. The Thrive work that happened is also being folded in, and they will be meeting with Thrive. So that's been super helpful. It's been a nice kind of lineup of a lot of pre-work that has happened in the community that helps them, not have to spend a lot of time doing some of this other stuff first. So in the affordable housing plan, we'll also be making recommendations about, are there things we're not doing that we should be doing? Should we have a preservation program that's buying or helping somehow to buy apartment buildings that are going up for sale to preserve them for affordable housing? Should we, all those kind of questions. I mentioned to them yesterday the bedroom question, like, what should we be doing with bedrooms? Like, that's a question that's come up. So there are some things like that. And if there are things that you think of that we haven't talked about, or if you want to, just feel free to shoot me an email and say, I really want to make sure this covers this. There's a second version of this timeline that is by month, which works much better for how my brain works. And then how's the community being engaged? Late October, early November, there will be a bigger visit, maybe longer visit with more team members coming to Asheville to really doing some in-depth community engagement. And then there's a second bigger visit in March when they're bringing back recommendations for review. And I'll talk a little bit about how that AHAC is involved in that in a second. So March coming back, doing resident review, but it's also a stakeholder review of, they're finalizing the recommendations, and then, there's a last visit to present to City Council. And maybe, if there's a few hours in that visit to also maybe meet with you all or, particular, we haven't lined that up yet exactly, but we've got some extra hours there. So, one question that has come up in my conversations with Andy and Brian and Margie is this question of an advisory committee. The standard way that the city does these plans, and this is probably my fifth one, we tend to form an advisory committee that's separate from any board or commission, that has a broader reach, that has more stakeholders involved. I managed the downtown master plan, and we had a 30-person advisory committee that was really 21 people were mostly involved. Downtown commission members were a part of that. We're kind of not going to do that this time. We're going to take a totally different approach. So I'm pretty excited about this, actually. So instead of doing this traditional advisory committee, which in all honesty, how that generally works is that the people that we're really somewhat more focused on, as I said before, we're trying to center equity and center the community in this plan. Those folks on the advisory committee tend to be outnumbered. We tend to have a lot of power players in the room. They tend to drop off the committee, or they just don't participate. And then at the end of the plan, we don't feel good about it because we don't feel like we didn't hear from the community the way we wanted to. Seen it time and time again. So we're trying something different, and this is kind of Enterprise is guiding this, and so we really were looking to them for guidance. So what we're going to do is this is a working title, not official yet, but a resident engagement roundtable. So that roundtable will be focused on community engagement, informing the outreach of Enterprise and their ambassadors of the plan. The makeup of the roundtable should be predominantly residents and people who are impacted by outcomes. Since we're centering equity, we need an over-representation of people impacted by city programs. And then this roundtable will bring community voices to the center of the conversation. We think there will probably be monthly meetings of this group, and we would expect 2 or 3 members of AHAC to be on that committee. So this isn't a huge committee, it's probably 15 or less. Now, what else did I write here? So, I've already talked about that. So the consultant's coming in here in December, as I said, and that part of that visit will be stakeholder mapping and figuring out how do we put this thing together. It's not a done deal, it's not figured out yet. I think this is what they do in communities. They go to the community, get to know it a little bit better before they start forming this committee. So it's not me, I started drafting my typical list. And I was like, thank goodness we're not doing this, right? I had like Matt Allen from Lotzar. I had, you get the typical thing. So I'm really excited to try something different we want a different kind of plan that really says all the things. I don't want to keep repeating myself. So, role of AHAC. So you all are the policy, as Andy said at the beginning of the meeting, you all are the policy advisory committee, and you all will help implement plan recommendations when it's completed and adopted. So with that goal, we want you to be involved throughout the planning process. And by the end of the plan, we want AHAC members to feel fully invested and see your input and the impact of your recommendations in the plan. So here's some specific ways. I already mentioned that you should have 2 or 3 seats on this board. City staff or Enterprise. Enterprise is willing to give monthly updates for your meetings. In terms of like producing an update, or if they're here. Members of AHAC will be invited to focus groups or interviews, public meetings. We hope that you will also be ambassadors of the plan. That would be very helpful. And you'll have opportunities to give feedback on the planning process. We also discussed yesterday during their March visit, them meeting with you all, having a special meeting just with AHAC to get feedback. There may be some other opportunities like in October to do something like that as well. I think they understand that you all are deeply involved and committed, and we're not trying to push AHAC aside in any way. So I don't know what you all think of that. It's a different approach, and I kind of feel like it's time to try something different in these planning processes.
I'm actually excited. I'm smiling because I'm like, yes, something new and innovative, because it is always the same usual suspects. And a lot of time that does silence the voice of those most negatively impacted by some of the decisions that's made by this. So I'm excited. I'm over here like, I wonder how many housing residents going to be on here, because people are always trying to move out and trying to move up. So it's like, I'm excited.
Great. Other thoughts or reactions? Or are there questions about the plan in general? Since we have kind of just started, normally, like if I come talk about a plan, I like to have like a whole set of everything to share with you. We just don't have it yet. In the next 2 weeks, I will be putting up a project page on our website and the timeline and getting some general broad information out there, just so people know it's starting to come. We're starting to plan around events, like there's a reparations summit, there is the Lotzar is doing an affordable housing fair. Like, are there places where we can be to kind of reach out and start getting the word out and things like that? So they actually mentioned yesterday, sorry, I'm bad for talking forever, but yesterday they also mentioned that they would love your suggestions for people on this roundtable. Like if you have specific people, and there's a lot of times, sometimes in these processes we find like, oh, there's somebody who isn't on every board, or some folks aren't overtapped. We have a lot of overtapped people in our community. And it doesn't mean everybody has to be like that, but there are people out there. There's been a lot of great work in our community in leadership development, and there's a lot of cool people out there. So if you have ideas, would love to hear them.
Just a quick question. I mean, this looks great. I love that Duan is excited because of the new approach. I wonder, there has been quite a lot of work done in this space, quite a lot of reaching out to the community and engaging community. Is there any fear of fatigue?
Yes,
Right?
yes.
And I mean, what sort of guidance, how are we approaching that? I don't even really know how to ask this question.
Right. Yes, absolutely, 100%. That is a concern of, and that's why I was kind of mentioning also trying to get some new folks involved who have that lived experience, but maybe haven't been like tapped on the shoulder like 10 times a year to give their input. But at the same time, we want everybody to get a chance to give input if they, and one of our consultants yesterday mentioned people also want to know that what they're doing, if they sign up for something like this, that it's actually going to result in an action, that they're not just sitting around discussing issues. So Enterprise is very aware. They mentioned it yesterday too, and I don't have the answer yet for that.
Is there still a dedicated staff person for neighborhoods?
Yes, there's actually two,
Okay.
or a community engagement manager and a neighborhood person, yes.
Okay. So that could be a good resource
Mhm,
there,
yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Do they have, I can't remember if I saw on their webpage, do they have actually examples of affordable housing plans they've done for other cities? I know it's helpful, like with Opticos, whatever it was, they had, we were able to see what they did because, they're kind of boilerplate, so we know what we get was look pretty similar to the others, but have they done other housing plans?
Oh, yeah.
And were they on, I don't remember seeing them on their website, are there ones that we can be
Sure,
shared with?
I can share a list
Yeah,
with you, and
okay.
I feel like I maybe
You
did
shared
that
you shared several samples in the meeting packet for
last month.
August, I believe.
Yeah, yes, but they are, yes,
Okay.
yes, they've done a lot of plans.
So I got a question. As far as how the people will be represented on this not task force, this new group, this new way of doing things, what is the recruitment process, or how are people knowing who might not be on one of these neighborhood committees? Like if it's
Right.
really intentional about making sure that we touching people who might not have a million things going
Right,
on
right.
already. So how is it marketed? I guess that's like, how is it
Yeah,
being
I'm
put
not-
out, or?
I don't know yet,
Oh,
but
okay.
I'm not sure yet.
Sorry.
But, no, it's a good question, so, and, yeah. And I think we even put some money aside in the contract for stipends as well, to try to help that process. Because we would love for those people to actually tap into their networks if they're willing and get participation, kind of more grassroots. But yes, Barry, they are, affordable housing plan background. Here's their proposal. So I guess I don't, I thought I did provide that, but I'm not sure where.
Yeah, I was thinking, you sent examples of plans from other cities when we were first talking about doing the plan, but you
Oh,
didn't
okay.
send examples of plans from
But I'll put together a short
Enterprise,
list
yeah.
for you all
Yeah.
to look at them.
Yeah, I think it was really helpful because like with the missing middle one, it's really helpful to say this is what an Opticos plan looks like. If you're looking at it for Greenville, wherever they've done it, there's some similarities to it. So I think like it would
Sure.
help with this, thanks.
Absolutely.
And you're right, I was just thinking about the fatigue, you're right. I mean, especially now with interest rates and construction costs and everything. Yeah, it's like trying to fight affordable housing and help. It feels like, you're kind of, it's like being seal clubbing all the time. Like it just feels such, like it's so hard, right? I mean, it's always been hard, but boy, it's really
Right.
hard now.
Well, and there's just a lot of community processes happening. The reparations process is really kind of getting more and more amped up, and Missing Middle is kind of heading into like final products, which is going to create another cascade of something. Yeah, so there's always, yeah, I was trying to figure out, is there more going on now than usual? Because it feels like it, but I'm not sure if that's real or not.
It's the interest rate's huge. I mean, that's having a huge effect right now on so much, and because it's like, what Anna was saying, like, it just doesn't work. And then it's having, on the construction side, like for the bigger development construction side, I was just talking to someone in Charlotte who sells a lot of the multifamily projects, and boy, it's like, the world's changed. Like, it's made it so much harder, and it's changed. The banks have, really tightened up.
Any other questions or comments?
Sasha, I want to thank you for, sorry, it takes a lot of nerve to come up with and share a plan that's not fully finished and is still in the vision stage, but that invites trust, because, you could come up and you say, oh, here's how it's all going to go, and here's how we're going to do it, and then everybody goes, oh, well, this is already, the outcome's already baked in. So thank you for your willingness to share with us through the process on this and give us a chance to inform that. It sounds really exciting. And then I would say to my colleagues on AHAC, I think it's going to be really important for us as we bring these 4 new members onto the committee to really plug them into this process of developing the affordable housing plan, because they're going to have the most longevity in terms of implementing the goals and strategies that we identify. So clearly, those of us who are on the committee now have a little bit of runway on this, but we really, bringing 4 people on right now as we're starting a planning process means that we have, a lot of longevity into the future of getting this plan implemented and having, that AHAC's oversight on it. So I would just encourage you to do what you can as we bring these new folks on to get them really actively engaged in whatever roles we have with the affordable housing plan.
Yeah, and I think that March visit will be a great time to really have you all really be able to react to all the, really get, feel like when we get to that final outcome, like, yes, we can support this and be a part of the implementation.
All right, thank you, Sasha. So we are around to our updates, and we are right on time, which is almost unheard of with this committee, so let's don't blow it at this point. With our housing updates, again, I want to thank Barry Bialik for providing our the MLS data and Tara, the Housing Authority data that goes into our data analysis every month for this committee. And I also want to thank Babs Phillips for agreeing to carry on with the MLS piece of that once Barry gets to his final meeting, which is not this meeting. So I'm going to turn it over and let y'all walk us through what we're seeing in the housing data.
I'll give a quick history of where this data came from. That way you know kind of how you want to use it in the past. So the committee's year for years tracked housing sales under contract for less than $250,000, which is what was determined to be affordable at the time years back. What happened is that there started to be no properties left on that list, or maybe 2. And so what happened is there's no houses left on the list. So we had to expand the criteria up to $375,000, which is not affordable by any means, but just to show what the inventory is and what there is less than $375,000. So that's where the criteria has jumped. I think we went from 250 to 275 to 375. So what we prepare is the lists that show everything that's available on the MLS in the city of Asheville that's less than $275,000 that's active, $375,000 that's active and for sale, what has closed over the past 30 to 40 days, depending on the last meeting time we've had, and then what's currently under contract. So we get to see kind of what's available, what's under contract, and what's closed. That way we have some historical, just to see how much headwind we have against us in affordable, in trying to get more affordable housing. So that's of the house data. And yeah, tracking, as we know, we hear the numbers that the average house cost in Asheville is now exceeding $500,000. The ones on the list that if you see, like almost generally, anytime, I mean, I'd say almost anytime there's a list, there's one of the houses I've built on it because I tend to be one of the most reasonably priced, affordable builders in town. So I think on this list, 2 of the houses I noticed were ones either I constructed or that were like I built now as new, or that was a resale that I built 4 years ago. But just for reference, those are 2-bedroom houses. Like on mine, because I can speak to mine well, a 960 square foot house is now $380,000. A resale of a house that I built years ago that the entire contract for building was $110,000 is now $355,000. So just to give you some scale of reference, that especially when I watch the resales, like, you know, house I built for $110,000 worth of land is now $350,000. So that's kind of where the history of the data, what we look at. Recently, what I've always said as a builder, I'm always on the front end of seeing what house prices are going to be based on land prices. And what I've really watched, over the past many years is how land prices have just gone skyrocketed, because the reality is you can't, like the way financing works, whatever the land cost is, the house is going to be at least 3 to 4 times that. Because for mortgage and financing, land has to be 25 to 33% of the cost basis. So what happened is land just disappeared. So what I added on, just for reference, is land listings, because we realized in the city of Asheville, there was no land less than $100,000. And it's probably right now about $125,000. It's scraps. And so that means today's land are tomorrow's house prices. So if land right now is $125,000, that means next year's houses, there are none less than $500,000. So that, what I use that as a guiding tool with this data is how do we bring land prices down, which is, that's where that's how I've kind of used this data and where I came to, provide it to share with it. And yeah, I think Brian talked about there may be better ways to represent it as a whole instead of having to see the individual pieces. But that's what I've always done with the data, is it's been a good tracking point for this is where housing prices are going. And then recently adding on the land report has been, very dramatic, I felt, because, that means that we need to help with land prices now to help tomorrow's house prices. So that's what I've always done. That's what I've done with it. That's where the logic behind what I've used it for came from. So just wanted to share that.
Great, thanks, Barry. Any observations, thoughts from the rest of the committee? Scott?
Yeah, I was going to have Sasha just quickly pull up one of the listings that I noticed that's under contract. It's 11 Wellspring Lane. It's really intriguing. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath house, relatively new construction, 2019. And if Sasha can pull it up, I think it's an interesting example of something that will hopefully come more so out of our missing middle housing study, and that it's essentially a cottage court. I just took a look at it. It's a really interesting site. You've got a 1969 ranch house that was probably on a much larger rural lot when it was built. And now, of course, it looks like 5 out of the 10 original home sites that were on a 2015 and 2018 plat have been built out. So, it's $339,000. So that's still over $300 a square foot, which is not cheap. But interestingly, I think it's an interesting example of, I think, a model that could make housing more accessible, particularly to smaller households, either if you're aging or if you're just out of school and transitioning from a group of roommates, different things like that. So yeah, can you turn on the aerial? So if you go to the upper right under search base map images, that top one there, if you can just click on the aerial. Yes, thank you. So basically the house that's for sale is immediately north of that ranch house right in the middle there. But you can kind of see that, it's a cluster of small cottages. I think it's about a 2.5, 3 acre site. So anyway, I just wanted to have Sasha bring that up. Thank you, by the way. I think it's an interesting example of a smaller footprint, so a little something, a little out of the box. And then also, Sasha, while you've got the map up, if you don't mind, if you could just type in the search Atlanta Avenue. There were 2 On the land listings, there were 2 listings under 100,000, and Atlanta Avenue and nearby Ivy Street it's a really interesting site. This is in West Asheville, just off of Patton Avenue. Basically, if you've got a frame of reference for the Chipotle or the abandoned Arby's, it's right behind there, but I think it's also just a really interesting example of, particularly the potential for infill. There's a lot of platted lots there. There's probably some challenges in that they're paper streets, so you'd have to build out the streets and whatnot. But just looking at the listings, I think those are 2 really interesting examples of ways to get housing costs moving in the right direction, which is to either be down or stabilizing, particularly for people that are needing more affordable options. Let's see if Sasha can just bring this up briefly. Yeah, so I'm not sure, I wasn't able to look at which 2 lots they were, but again, it's just, I think it's an interesting example of trying to take the old phrase, we're out of money, so now it's time to think. And in some ways, we're out of land, so now it's time to think.
Yeah, I think both of those, it's always funny to dive deep into the land less than $125,000 because I think what happens is like there's lots that come up. There's always something with them, and I think that's a paper. I think when you get into a paper street, that's not that the roads aren't completed, which means it needs to meet the City of Asheville road standards, which then triggers fire truck turnarounds. So that's what always happens. It's like, especially if you see a $100,000 lot.
If it's cheap on the face of it, there's probably a catch.
Yeah, but that's, that again helps. But I look at those are good examples of this should help drive the need for road standard changes in the City of Asheville. And then your cottage development example, that is it's a tool that's been underutilized. That's one that I know the Missing Middle Study is working on. That's one that I've got 2 UDO amendments I'm pushing through. One's for adjusting flag lots to make them more usable, and one is the cottage development to bring it down to where it can be used for as few as 2. It can be used for connected units because right now it just doesn't allow it, and to drop some of the limitations about how they have to position about the greenway, but to make it easier to use those tools, which is what we need to bring land costs down.
Right. And in this site, if you go by there, there's 2 houses under construction right now. It's 12 and 14 Ivy Street. They're both, I think, just barely 16 feet wide. But they're single-family detached, and they look great. So I think this is just an interesting, quick example of kind of an evolving area, particularly for infill and creative thinking on small lots.
Great. Any other thoughts on the for sale property listing? Again, this is our
Scott,
what should be our naturally occurring affordable housing if it were affordable. So.
The first one you brought up, was that was it approved in the city as a cottage development or just as a Planned Community Act?
So the plat had a reference to the Planned Community Act.
Gotcha.
I don't know the specifics of cottage development or whatnot. I just was looking at the the physical layout and form of it, saying, oh, okay, that's definitionally
Right.
If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it must be a cottage. But it was done under a Planned Community Act plat.
Anything on the rental data that we want to discuss this month? I think it's that bar chart right there. Yeah, the voucher data, sorry.
Do we ever I know we started some discussions about how to compile, or if anyone's compiling actual rental prices, because I know we never really found one or had a local, I don't know if there's anyone in the local market who really prepares that, but I'd be interesting, because I've heard there's a little bit of softening of rent prices, but I haven't seen any numbers to back it up. I don't know it's always been a conversation. We always decided it would be helpful data, steering data, but I don't know if we know of anyone in the market who provides that.
Yeah, at this point, I don't know of anyone who's collecting it, and again, we've been talking about it for
Yeah.
a while, and
Yeah.
I think that person would have, if you're out there and you're collecting rental data,
We want you.
we want you to share it with us. That may be one of those places where the people who have the best knowledge of that are people who are in it,
Yeah.
tenants who are in a housing search right now. I mean, it's sort of
Yeah.
crowdsourced.
It's a good idea.
I was saying yes because I had a book yesterday. I met with Atlanta Sky person, and she gave me the new affordable book, and I was just on all the websites writing down the prices for 2 bedrooms and 3 bedroom apartments. Everything's over $2,000, and I'm like, Lord Jesus, how is this gonna happen?
Yeah, yeah. So the trends, seem to be fairly steady with voucher utilization and.
I did have the director take a, once over to kind of give you a little more information in text as to each voucher program to kind of define it a little better. And so we broke them out a little bit as it relates to the project-based and the tenant-based. So that's what you'll see there, specific entities that in which vouchers are dedicated to. You'll see that as well. And then, of course, the rest of it is just general usage.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. That's all really helpful information.
So I do have a question. So on the home ownership, line, I think it's number 15. So it say 11 for reexam. What is reexam? I'm sorry.
So what that means is that recertification.
Oh,
And so just to confirm eligibility again,
okay.
which is, I believe is done for homeownership, for our tenant-based and project-based is annually. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is the same for homeownership as well. Because we do have homeowners who receive subsidy and so therefore have to be re-examined again annually.
Okay.
No, that first one is where all the good information is.
All right. Well, if there's no further discussion on that, we've got, Sasha, you have the updates on what CED has been up to, Affordable Housing Division updates.
I don't have a lot of updates, actually. I'll just say department-wide, we're hiring folks. We had a new Community Development Analyst 2 start this week, Deborah Johnson, she's from Tennessee. Dennis Newbern, who you all met a month or two ago, kind of stole her away from his old employer. And she's got tons of finance experience. So that's really, she's focusing on CDBG and home. So that's super helpful. I think I talked to you last month about some promotions that happened with Kayla, and we're just in the hiring process and kind of just keep moving along. My focus is really or a big part of my focus will be right now for the next few weeks is the data request from Enterprise and kind of feeding them information, and actually hiring somebody. That's my new focus as well, which I haven't had time to get to, but this next week or two, I'm hoping to really kind of get my final candidate, so. Is there anything else on this? I can't think of anything
Two questions,
else.
one on the
Sure.
staffing. So I know this has been an ongoing struggle. What percent of your open positions or what percent of your total positions are filled at this point?
Sure.
Seal McCreed, Director of the Department. We currently have funded, I think it's 21 positions, and in fact, this new budget cycle, allowed us to have funding for a brand-new position entitled the Redevelopment Project Manager. So we're actually actively finalizing the job description for that, and we'll post that soon. But the intent of that position is to help us through city-owned land redevelopment. So that's an organizational work plan item that we've been tasked with for this year. And so really coming on the heels of the 319 Biltmore project, hoping to get that closed soon, we'll be ready to prioritize the next slate of properties. And so with that, I think that brings our overall head count to 21. And right now, I think our open position count is 7. So we have 7 open positions. That's, I think that's 2 in our community development division. And so they're a team of 7, so that's 2 there. Sasha's down 1, so they're a team of 2 in our affordable housing division. Our homeless strategy is fully staffed. That's a team of 4, although one of those is a grant-funded position through the opioid planning grant, so just noting that. And then our economic development division, that's really the last one that's been fully formed, and so we are in the process to hire a business inclusion manager, kind of in the final stages there, hopefully with that one. We have an economic development specialist vacancy that's currently posted, and then the redevelopment manager is there too. But we had our real estate manager start within the last several weeks too, Kimmy Hunter, who's been kind of adjacent to city government for a while, and it's great to now onboard her fulfilling the role as the real estate manager. So we're excited to have her skills that she brings to the table there. And then on my team, we have my assistant, the business services administrator. We promoted that person into the Kayla role. So trying to, work within a lot of the shifts that we've had, but keep positive, keep moving on, and really then build out the team. I think overall, I'm really excited. I think our structure is set. So again, we've gone through a big overhaul with basically having 2 divisions, economic development, community development, to really right-sizing the workload for each of the 4 subgroups that we have. So thanks for your time.
And then my other question, when are we thinking about the next round of Housing Trust Fund RFPs?
Sure. So the plan is to follow what we did last year. So December, opening applications, February, closing deadline. So it lines up with the county, lines up with CDBG and home, and then April allocations.
And does our current timeline for revisions and recommendations to that sync up with what would you like to be, do we need to have those recommendations approved before you do a request for proposal so that people know what the scoring criteria that they're going to be applying against? I just want to make sure that we're hitting that timeline and not doing all this work and it doesn't get implemented for 13 more months.
I've been thinking about that, and I wanted to talk with Janice, Ashley, and legal about that. I think because I was going to say to you, we may end up in that same situation where we were last year. But if you all were voting by November, that would be great. That would give us a little bit more time. I mean, then we're in the holidays, so it gets a little tricky with HCD meetings, but I think we can make that work. Okay. I think the Luigi is kind of a more, I'm not, that would be a little bit different. I'm not timetable.
Okay. So in terms of the work of that task force, we should really prioritize Housing Trust Fund. Maybe, yeah. So that any of those revisions, if we get Housing Trust Fund done and maybe discussed and voted on at our next month's meeting, so that we were teed up for all of the other steps, and they're different.
Yeah, they're like it's almost like apples and oranges, even though they kind of have similar goals. Housing Trust Fund scoring criteria isn't determining the amount of money you're getting like Luigi. It's very tied to exactly how much you qualify for. And it's a little bit higher stakes kind of thing. Housing Trust Fund is one element of your application. It doesn't determine whether or not you get money.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Can I ask, do we have sometimes in the department updates we get just like an update what the housing trust fund, like, just so we know ahead of time, because if we're saying it's the applications will be due in December, it means the call will go out soon.
No, the call is in December.
Oh, the call's in December, okay.
Yes.
So just like, what is the current housing trust fund balance? Because I know last year is 5 point something, but I know some was allocated, so that way we know what is actually the unallocated balance from the trust fund, so that, we can kind of
Yeah.
help. Because December is, that way we can help kind of drum up those applications, that's one question. And then if we have, are there any current, like, are there any Luigi applications that are come in that are?
We're not accepting them, so,
Okay.
no.
Was old Luigi?
Sorry, Luigi, oh, did you say Luigi? Yes.
Yeah, Luigi.
No, no, none have come in. I've
Okay.
had conversations with people, sorry, I thought you meant housing trust fund.
Yeah.
No, I don't have
Okay.
any, so
Yeah.
it looks like, so I'm taking a
Yeah.
break from city council for a little bit, but,
Okay, so it's not like, the only thing that was put on pause was Luigi for the micro units, but
Right.
it still is open at any
Yes.
time someone could put in a Luigi application.
Yes.
Okay. But I think that, just maybe for the next meeting, it would be helpful. to see
yeah,
what is the-
I could
what
give
is
that to you at
housing
your
trust
next
fund balance.
meeting. I'm not sure exactly
Yeah.
how much it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Sasha on what the team is working on? Scott, anything new on missing middle?
Nothing to date. To my understanding, the next steps in that are for, I believe it's Cascadia Partners, that's the sub-consultant to provide their gentrification and displacement analysis. Otherwise, to my knowledge, we on the working group are in kind of a holding pattern. There was a draft report released from Opticos last month. We all provided comments. To my knowledge, it hasn't been publicly released just because it
I haven't seen it.
still had a bunch of holes in it, placeholders, but I believe within the next month, that should be coming out from Opticos, a month or two, and then also following up with Cascadia Partners on the gentrification displacement analysis. Speaking of missing middle, I'll just make a quick plug that 2 hours over the mountains in Knoxville, they also had a previous study from Opticos, and they are now actively considering zoning changes based on that study. So just if you want a nearby point of comparison, possibly, that's actively going on over there.
Can you give us any detail about what's involved in that displacement study? I think
I
that's
can,
particularly germane to the missing middle's work around affordable housing and how that's going to affect that. So I'd love for this committee to understand that.
So that report, which CED funded, so I want credit for that. We funded that piece because we thought it was very important to really consider displacement risk. So it doesn't have the word gentrification in it, but we all mentally weave that in.
Sorry, I was
No, it's
throwing out
okay.
the two for reference.
Yeah. So it's based on an academic work, I shouldn't say academic, I think it's done by a professor out in Portland who did a very in-depth neighborhood, really drilled down. It probably took a couple of years. I've just glanced at it, study.
This is the Bates study from back in like
Maybe,
2015. 16.
maybe, I'm not sure, yeah. That sounds right. And so what that person, I think it was a female, I think what she did is she created an index using different measures. So you're looking at education, income, race, I think she looked at race, I'll say that. I can't remember, but basically what you're trying to get to is like, what's the rate of change happening in neighborhoods? And how do all these factors kind of influence that, not influence it, but come together? So to create an index to kind of say, what's the risk for this neighborhood versus this neighborhood in terms of how fast is change happening in this neighborhood? So it's, I mean, it was kind of, in a way, for that kind of study, a small budget, I will say. So it's not as in-depth as the Portland study, for sure. But the goal really is to say, if Asheville liberalized its zoning rules in terms of allowing, so for example, a neighborhood that's mostly RS8 zoning, which is single family, kind of, it's very typical, a lot of Montford, Shiloh, maybe parts of East End, neighborhoods have that zoning. So it doesn't allow duplexes, it doesn't allow triplexes, it doesn't allow a bunch of things. If we liberalized that and opened up more land, what would happen? Because we know that investment follows that. So what's the risk of the idea is, what's the risk of those existing residents being displaced? And, who's vulnerable to that? Who's more vulnerable, what's the range? So that's the idea. And does that influence how we implement the recommendations? Now, Cascadia Partners will say, generally speaking, they think something should be implemented everywhere because if you only do it in certain neighborhoods, then you put more pressure on those neighborhoods. And I think that's a very kind of removed point of view. I think for people who live here, it's a little bit more, it's a different perspective, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is the trickiest part in my mind, as we think about affordable housing and the missing middle process is,
Yes.
On the one hand, it creates land, to Barry and Scott's point when we were looking at the housing data, it allows density, which potentially gives us the opportunity to create more units and more affordable units. But anytime you're upzoning, you're basically creating wealth for those property owners. And so depending on who has control of ownership of that property, it's a real imbalance. If you avoid certain neighborhoods because of the pressure for gentrification, you're also excluding those neighborhoods from the wealth increase. But if you allow that, you're opening them up to the potential that outside investors come in and raise values in a way that displaces existing residents. So I think that, to my mind, as we get into the final stretches with the missing middle piece, I'd really like this committee to pay a lot of attention to that displacement study and how it overlays with those missing middle tactics so that we can help advise around the right kind of policies to thread that needle. It's a very tricky question, and would be a little bit concerned that the displacement study that we're having done, if it's following that methodology, I think that uses like census tract data, which doesn't necessarily follow zoning districts. So it's going to be really hard to, I think, to apply maybe some of that in the way that we need to figure out how best to make policy around that. So just, I want to put a pin in this piece of the missing middle study, which we've been really excited about hearing from Scott and Emily and others on the progress that they're making, and certainly there's ground to be gained in creating opportunities for more innovative kinds of housing types that could be more affordable. But I think we've really got to be focused on how we thread this needle so that it doesn't. There's nothing about about increasing allowable density and housing type that necessarily correlates with affordability unless we make sure that the policies correlate with affordability. All right, sorry, that was my soapbox moment for the day. I got to get one of them in, even if I'm going to chair. Any other questions, soapboxes that people want to get on with missing middle? All right.
I will share one thing. The UDO amendments, that I've driven that for flag lot, changing the flag lots to open up, changing the flag lot size to match what the zoning standards are, and then the cottage development, adjusting it down to 2. So they've passed P&Z. So next step would be to go to council. Cottage will go right to council. Flag lot, we're running through the technical review committee, which is trying to get some constructive input from city staff, but it's going to council. Probably we're working on a council date, probably in October. But those should the goal is to open up increased affordable housing lots, and while that opens up lots in general, and I know I don't know the process, but what I would really love is somehow to look at as a parallel portion to that is how do we come up with an affordable housing rebate or housing trust fund that can encourage those new lots to be used for affordable housing? And I know that's definitely in my mindset, like, how do we do that? And I don't, and even after being on this committee for 2 years, I don't even understand the process for how we introduce that stuff other than us submit our own UDO wording amendments. But I think it's a valuable tool that can align with it. Definitely in other cities, flag lots and back lots are used for CLTs. Like, so I've thought about how all these back lots can be CLT lots, can be affordable, easy rebates, like if someone's willing to do them. So I don't even know where that introduces in discussion other than if I, come Housing Trust Fund time, if I actually submit a proposal for that, but, it's something that I would love somehow to get considered by the committee is if this is going to open up an abundance of new lots in the city, how can we create a ride-along rebate tool that encourages the use of those lots to be used for the right purpose?
Yeah.
Soapbox.
And that sounds like a great comment to get into our comprehensive housing plan discussion as well, how we kind of link all that up. And potential new policies that are missing, I think, lands right in what the work of the consultants are on that piece.
Just for clarification, I'm sorry, what is the CLT law? What is CLT?
A community land trust. So
Okay, sorry, okay.
So in other markets, like Durham does this a lot, that backyard flag lots are sometimes donated to community land trusts, and then there's construction of small rental houses. Community land trusts, a lot of other places do a lot more rentals than homeownership, but it's an option that opens up like backyard lots for the use of community land trust donations.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so if there's nothing else, looking at future agenda items, obviously we've talked about this already, bringing our Housing Trust Fund and Luigi recommendations to this committee over October and November. I think it sounds like we're likely to hear from our plan consultants from Enterprise at some point in the fall at one of our meetings. So get that on the calendar. And then we are, some of you will remember a couple of years back, we had a work session, a retreat day. And so we're looking at that again for December 7th in place of our regular December meeting, with the idea of being, let's spend a little bit of time onboarding our 4 new committee members and just kind of regrounding. That's also the time when we need to take a look at our work plan and priority recommendations for council for the new year. So we'll do some of that work in December. And then we have a couple of outside events coming up, the Affordable Housing Fair with Land of Sky Realtors Association on the 23rd, and then the North Carolina Affordable Housing Conference on October 23rd, 24th. Any other news, updates, announcements, things you want to share for the good of the order? Anything that we need to get onto a future agenda that's
There is a,
pressing topic
Dewana
for you?
might know the date. The Reparations Commission's having a summit, right? In October.
7th.
And it's also, some of you represent organizations. I think some organizations are tabling or are going to be there too. So I think it's going to be at UNCA, and so I think it's going to be a fairly large event, and it's important. It's a way to possibly plug in if you haven't been plugged in.
I can send you the information and then you can send out to the group.
The housing fair, the realtors one, I don't think there's any panel discussions or any presentations. It's just more tables, I think.
Yes,
But I haven't seen
that's
it.
correct. Yep. I will be there at a table.
All right. Well, that brings us around to public comments. Is there any public comment?
We did not receive any public comment.
Okay. And there is no one in the room to provide public comment, so we'll close public comment at 11:19. And unless there's any other discussion by the board, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion?
In a second?
Second.
All right. Then we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.